Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Munch. I'm the lab program manager at NREL for computing. And I'll introduce our other panelists here. Aaron Anderson is our high performance computing operations manager at NREL. And our special guest, I'd like to introduce Kevin Lin also. He's the program director for high performance computing and also the grid modernization director at EERE. So welcome, Kevin. Thank you for being here to help kick us off.
Thanks so much, Chris. I was just thinking, we were just chatting before the call started, and I just realized it's been 10 years since we just first kicked off high performance computer. Secretary Moniz signed Peregrine back in 2013 when we first started ESIF and the HPC back then, and we've come 10 years since, and it's been really exciting. I've been working with the HPC team ever since it got started, so it's exciting times. One of the things, this has always been really exciting for me. We do so many really interesting projects with the high performance computer that supports EERE. So EERE, we really depend on high performance computing, and we're really excited about the new capabilities that Kestrel has, moving more from CPU to GPU capability, moving with the times as they move. So it's very exciting for us, and we use it for all sorts of things, whether it's for solar everything from sort of atmospheric capabilities and solar forecasting, everything to the minutia of like how lithium-ion batteries work. I mean, it's from the very small to the very large. We use it all the time, and it's really critical for us. One of the things that's also very exciting for me personally is when we first got this started in 2013. This was an open user facility, and we were going to try to be able to utilize and enlist industry and universities and to have broad calls. And one of the things, we just never had the capacity and the capability to have the kind of call that really just sort of opened it up. But with Kestrel, we have really made a major investment in our high performance computing, understanding how important it was for us. And we've opened it up to such an extent that we feel like we can now sort of open it up to all sorts, industry, universities, others, stakeholders to try to really use the capability to its fullest. So we're very excited for the first time, well, not the first time, but to really open it up in a way that we haven't opened it up in the past. And so we're very excited. I'm personally very excited. I know Chris is as well, and NREL is as well, to be able to really not just keep it sort of within the ERE family, but more broadly and across to address some of the many challenges. We have so many challenges. We have such a fast time horizon coming with 2035 and 2050 to have clean energy power system and energy system writ large. So HPC needs to fulfill that to help us get there. And with this new capability, we really think we can accelerate that. So thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to turn this over to you, but we're really excited about this, and we hope to get your proposals in and move the ball forward. So Chris, please take it away. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thanks for being here. Love your comments. This is definitely going to be an exciting year as we bring our next third generation supercomputer online, completely dedicated to the clean energy transition. So thanks again for being here. Appreciate it. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share some slides with everyone. So first, just some quick background. NREL's Computational Science Center supports computing operations for the EERE research community. The computers hosted at NREL are primarily used by R&D projects supporting EERE's technology offices. NREL is the primary HPC facility for EERE, and our operations staff supports both users and applications on our HPC systems. So the users of our HPC systems tap into the largest HPC environment available that is completely dedicated to advancing the renewable energy and energy efficiency technology landscape. And this year, as Kevin alluded to, we are excited to introduce our latest supercomputer. It's named Kestrel. And Kestrel is going to provide more than 5 times the computing power of Eagle, which is our current supercomputer. It's coming in at 44 petaflops. It has an architecture that's a balanced combination of both CPU and accelerated GPU processors. So welcome again to the FY24 allocation cycle, where you are going to be requesting time on this new system. Okay. One quick second. Well, I'm going to stop my video because then you can kind of concentrate on the slides here. Okay. So a quick FY24 summary. So in case you're just here for the highlights, the next 2 slides, pay attention to those. So allocations for FY24 will be made on Kestrel. Eagle will be available during FY24 for some period of time, but Eagle will only be available for existing projects that are transitioning over to Kestrel, and also projects that are finishing up their work in the first quarter of FY24. Kestrel is designed with both CPU nodes and GPU nodes. The GPU nodes are coming online in the second quarter, so that's January of 2024. This year, your requests need to pay particular attention to Kestrel's architecture. So this year, we're going to be asking you to differentiate your request between the CPU part of your request and the GPU part of your request. This is different from past years. Also, the allocation unit factors will be different because Kestrel is such a different expanded capacity. So it's going to be a different calculation that you will have to do. And these AU factors are also distinct between the CPU and GPU nodes. And that is because of the big difference in petaflops that each of those sets of nodes can supply. The other thing we want to make sure you do is give yourself enough time to do computing for transitioning your codes and workflows and to ramp into Kestrel's architecture. Finally, getting your request in early, imperative. If you don't already have a login on our system, get one now. Go in there and request one now so that you can avoid any delays. There's actually only a few weeks left to get your request in, so it's important that we kind of do this pretty quick. Specifically, the changes this year, because GPUs are about 60% of Kestrel's computational capacity, you're going to be asked for different request amounts for CPU nodes and GPU node AUs. And these AUs are going to have different AU factors. So 1 CPU node hour is equal to 10 AUs. 1 GPU node hour is equal to 100 AUs. You're going to see in upcoming slides some more details on why these are different and how to calculate those AUs. Also, something else that Kevin alluded to is with Kestrel's new capacity, the allocation process this year, we want to start considering projects that are not supported solely by EERE or NREL. So for these projects, on your request form, you'll be asked for an EERE mission statement, and that'll be required for those projects so that EERE can kind of make an assessment of how aligned it is with their mission. Once your request is submitted, it gets reviewed in a technical readiness process. So this year, that team is going to be paying particular attention to the CPU and GPU needs in your request and the supporting documentation that you're going to provide on your computational readiness. So please be responsive if a reviewer contacts you with questions about your submission. So the next few slides, we'll go over some details about Kestrel. Kestrel is being installed in NREL's ESIF data center as we speak right now. It's being built. We've started our acceptance testing. Similar to Eagle, it's going to also be a showcase of warm water cooling and waste heat recovery. Kestrel is a Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Cray EX supercomputer. It's configured with a high-speed Slingshot interconnect. It's going to give us about twice the network speed that Eagle had. And it's going to have up to 95 petabytes of parallel file system storage. So this slide shows a technical comparison between Eagle and Kestrel. Of note here on this slide are the next generation CPU processors. So these have many more cores per processor than Eagle had. The expanded capacity and speed of the interconnect, increased memory on the standard CPU compute nodes, And also the next generation GPU processors and more GPU capability per GPU node. So there's going to be 4 NVIDIA H100s per GPU node on Kestrel. And we're also going to be providing data analysis and visualization nodes for those interactive and visualization workloads. So for a quick CPU node comparison from Eagle to Kestrel. So as we move into Kestrel's CPU node, you'll notice that Kestrel CPU nodes will have 2 Intel Xeon Sapphire Rapids processors. Each processor has 52 cores. That's providing a total of 104 cores per node. And the CPU nodes will also have 256 gigabytes of DDR5 memory. So when you're making a request for CPU AUs, keep these things in mind. Pay attention to the different architecture, a lot more cores, more memory on the node. So know how your codes and workflows are going to utilize those resources and be prepared to manage your jobs to most efficiently use those resources as you can. Again, be sure to account for development time and ramp time, especially for those new workflows. And another thing to pay attention to is consider the needs of all project members that have to do computing, especially on those large projects. So on the Eagle versus Kestrel GPU nodes, Kestrel GPU node is going to have 4 NVIDIA H100 GPUs with 80 gigabytes of memory. And on the node itself, you'll have 348 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. And you're also going to have 2 AMD Genoa CPUs on those nodes. And those CPU cores will total 128 per node. So each of those AMD Genoas has 64 cores. So when you're making a request for GPU AUs, keep these things in mind, paying attention again to the architecture, the fact that it has AMD CPUs. It also has XXM technology, which is a high bandwidth way of connecting those GPUs to the server. Again, knowing how your codes and workflows are going to utilize those GPUs. The way that we're going to allow Kestrel jobs to run is that you can request the number of GPUs that you need per node. So you can request 1 GPU per node or 2 or 4. There's going to be more on this later. And again, the same thing as CPUs. Be sure to account for development time and ramp time for new workflows. Consider the needs of all of your project members, especially for those large projects. So we've already used the term AU quite a bit. Most of you are familiar with an AU, but to give you a definition, an AU is a defined amount of compute time on the system, which should be theoretically consistent between machines. So that's to say an AU on Eagle is theoretically the same amount of compute as an AU on Kestrel. The reason I'm saying theoretically there is because that very much depends on how your jobs are making use of those resources. We already said that on Kestrel, 1 CPU node hour is 10 AUs, 1 GPU node hour is 100 AUs. So when calculating your requested AUs, be careful of that architecture. We recommend you actually build your request up based on that architecture and how many node hours you're going to need. And we're going to have a step through of that in a little bit. So what's available for FY24? If you remember on Eagle, we had about 55 million AUs available on Eagle for the whole year. This year on Kestrel, we're going to have 274 million AUs available across CPUs and GPUs. So that's going to break down to 192 million AUs on CPU nodes and 82 million AUs on GPU nodes. And remember, again, the GPU nodes don't get started until Q2. So there's a little bit fewer in FY24 than there will be in a full year, and 95 petabytes of storage. And resources get allocated on a split. EERE has 85% of that amount to allocate to EERE projects. NREL has a discretionary 15% that we allocate for NREL projects. So which projects are eligible to apply for time on Kestrel? Any ERE funded project at all the national laboratories, universities are all eligible. EERE mission impact projects that are supported by academia or industry, regardless of funding source, are eligible. Any NREL projects, regardless of funding source, are also eligible. You should apply for time if your project is already funded, or if your project is still under consideration and you don't know if it's going to be funded, you should still apply for time. Even if you have a project that you know you're going to be submitting that you haven't submitted yet, but you will be submitting during the summer of this summer, you should apply for time. The other important thing is we can only accept one allocation per funded project. So don't split your projects up into multiple allocations, even if that project is scattered across multiple labs or locations. We still want one project. And also, on the other hand, don't use umbrella applications that cover multiple projects. So that's one thing we'll be looking at in the review process. So keep that in mind. And then as far as the schedule goes, a quick reminder that NREL is not the decision maker for EERE projects. NREL's role is to gather the requests and the information and provide that information to EERE so that they can make the decisions on their allocations. The schedule this year started a week ago. So on May 10th, the call for computing requests was released. On June 9th, the requests are due. So you have until June 9th to get your requests filled out and submitted. In the month of July, NREL will send all of these application forms and the results of the technical readiness reviews up to EERE for decisions. And NREL will also begin its internal process for its projects. And then in September, EERE will send those allocation decisions back to NREL, and the operations team will implement those allocations on Kestrel. NREL project decisions will also be made around that time by NREL management, so that all projects, all allocations that are granted will be able to start on October 1st at the start of the fiscal year 24 computing cycle. As a reminder, the computing cycle is for 1 year. It starts on October 1st and it ends on September 30th of 2024. And another reminder, it's better to get your compute time in now if you think you're going to need it. So mid-year requests can be hard depending on how booked and busy the machine gets. So the technical readiness review process is a process that is done by NREL so that we can provide the best possible information to EERE to enable their decision making. So some of the things that are assessed during that process are whether or not the project is suitable for high performance computing. So the choices here that will be marked are ideal, meaning that it uses large scale parallelization, or it could be suitable, which means it can run effectively on high performance computing. And it can also be decided to be unsuited, which means it's not ready, or that for some reason the software is just not available or it can't run on HPC. Ideal and suitable are acceptable outcomes to pass the TRR. We also look at whether the project's ready to use GPUs, if that's appropriate for that particular code. We look at the size of the compute request, the size of the storage request, make sure that's justified with the explanations that come with it. We look at what software is going to be used, whether that software is available or not. And then we'll have staff that follow up with submitters if they have questions or something's not clear to them. So please make sure you respond to those questions quickly to keep the process moving. Okay, so the next 6 or 7 slides or so are going to go over the actual submission form. So some of the things to keep in mind as you fill it out, be as complete as possible. If you have questions, go ahead and ask. It's very important that you get this request filled out to the best of your ability. It makes it much smoother to get decisions back. So the first page you'll see is the login page. If you don't yet have an account on our system, please get that requested as soon as possible to avoid delays. So I would do that today, get your request in for your new account if you need a new account. So once you log in, you're going to hit this landing page. You need to click on the button on the right that says new FY24 HPC allocation request. There's actually a nice option in there. If you have a continuing project from last year or actually this current year, you can copy over that application and make changes rather than just starting from scratch. The next thing we're going to ask you for is your project information. So the first important thing to do is you have to create a handle, what we call a handle, which is a very short name, a few characters that describes your project. We ask you not to use the year in that name and don't use the word HPC in that name. On all of these screens, you're going to see little icons with an I. That will give you more information about what we're looking for there. We'll ask you for titles, abstract information. We also want you to give us an idea of what the EERE focus area for this, that kind of categorizes what you're using the HPC for. And then it's really important that we understand whether this is a new or continuing project and whether this is a new or existing workflow. So whether or not you've had this code up and running before is going to help the review team look it over. And then we ask for some keywords. We're going to ask for who can we contact as an HPC lead, as well as who the PI is. And then for funding information, we want to know what the funding area is. So up there in the top left where it says funding area, even if this project isn't funded by EERE or linked to a specific office, if it's work within a technology area, you should choose that technology area. We also want to understand the funding status. So if this is funding that's going to be or still being requested, but it hasn't been actually funded yet, use requested. And then we ask for things like, what are the project tasks and milestones so that we can kind of understand how HPC is fitting into your overall program. And then new this year is the EERE mission impact statement. So we need this statement for any projects that are not supported by EERE. So this is so that EERE can make decisions on how well aligned the work is with their mission. So the computational resources, this is going to be one of the most important parts of the application. So spend the time you need on this to most accurately estimate the size and the timing of your computing request. So the size of the request is going to be justified in some upcoming sections called the computational readiness section. Any really large requests that are asking for more than 1 million or so AUs are going to need a strong computational readiness section to go along with them. The other thing we need you to pay attention to is this use pattern on the far right. We're going to have more details on that in a couple slides. And this year, you can see we're asking for your totals for CPU and GPU AUs separately. These will get added up for you into your total request. And then it's also really important that we get a minimum number of total AUs and a maximum total AUs from you, because this gives some good reasoning behind the implications of if in case we need to use that range in our allocation decisions. This is really good information for EERE. We also have an AU estimator. So if you click on this, it'll pop up an estimator to kind of walk you through how to estimate AUs on Kestrel. So getting to that estimating AUs, remember that CPU and GPU nodes have distinct multiplication factors. So that has to come into play when you calculate your AUs. When you estimate the AUs you need, the first thing you should do is consider the architecture of the node, then estimate how many node hours will you need to do your work. Node hours is how many hours of compute time per node times the number of nodes to get the work done. trying to make sure you fill up the node efficiently as possible with work. And then you take those node hours and you multiply it by the AU multiplication factor. So for CPUs, that's 10. When you're estimating your GPUs, again, consider the architecture of the GPU nodes. Each node has 4 NVIDIA H100 GPUs. However, jobs will be allowed to run using partial GPU nodes. So we will be able to allocate those as partial nodes. So what this means is that when you run a job on Kestrel GPUs, you will be able to request 1 GPU per node or 2 GPU per node, 2 GPUs per node, or 4 GPUs per node. So since an entire GPU node for 1 hour is 100 AUs, a GPU node with only 1 GPU will be worth 25 AUs. So now that we know that, the formula for calculating how many GPU AUs you need is basically the number of node hours times the number of GPUs per node you will be using times 25 AUs. So the other important thing we ask you to put some thought to is your planned usage pattern. So we ask for this because computing time is a resource that has to be scheduled. An AU is a unit of time. As much as we would all love to be able to go back in time and get work done that we didn't get done the first time around, we can't turn back the clock. So the same goes for supercomputers. As time passes, there's going to be fewer AUs and less time left on the machine for the remainder of the year. So there's some choices for how you want to distribute your plan for computing. The first choice is just distributing equally across 4 quarters. This is what you should choose if you have a project that's already underway, you're certain you'll be able to hit the ground running, you can use your allocation evenly, you're going to start right away in October. That's the choice. That's actually the default choice, I believe. Some other choices you have are Q1 development time. So this is designed for projects that are just starting off. You need time to develop your code. Projects that haven't received their funding yet, but you're pretty sure it's going to come sometime in Q1. That's the choice for you. We also have a choice for starting in Q2. So this is, I know I'm not going to be able to start until January. That's the one you should choose. The last 2 choices are either you're going to use all your computing in the first half of the year or all your computing in the second half of the year. So that's either designed for projects that are ending mid-year, you know they're going to end, or you have very early milestones to hit. This last choice for second half computing, this is designed for projects that you know aren't starting until mid-year, where you have very late milestones and you want all your computing available for the end of the year. So keep in mind that the pattern you choose can affect your priority in the queue. It's best to try to match your use pattern as best you can to what's going to happen on your project. If you don't use AUs as planned, it's possible you could lose them. So we do have policies in place to remove unused past AUs because obviously we can't go back in time. So we cannot carry over all computing indefinitely into the future. So keep that in mind, spend some time on what you think your usage pattern should look like. And then the last few slides here on the form are going to be about computational readiness. So we like to understand what codes you're going to be using and how much of your project will be utilizing that code. That's that estimated use column there, that over all of your codes, that should add up to 100. We also like to try and understand the size of the majority of your runs and what the length of time your runs will be running for. And another thing we ask is whether or not this is an artificial intelligence or machine learning project. So are you using actual AI algorithms, ML algorithms, and or are you generating data sets that will then be used for machine learning AI? So on the software component, we're going to ask where these codes will be running. So we'll ask what part of the environment will your codes be running. So if it will mostly be running on CPUs or mostly be running on GPUs or potentially in the DAV nodes, make that choice there. We like to gather information on whether this code can currently run on GPUs and what is the effort, if you did have control over your code, what is the effort to move it to GPUs? And then also how many GPUs does it use if it uses GPUs? We would like to understand how you're using the DAV nodes, whether or not you will be expecting to use the DAV nodes and kind of an explanation of what you're going to use it for. And then we ask of our computational approach, which kind of is an overall explanation of what you're doing and your workflow. And then we ask for an AU request explanation. So this is a really critical piece here. We need to see how you built up that AU request. So we need you to kind of show your work. Tell us exactly how you did those multiplications, how you got to that CPU estimate, how you got to the GPU estimate. This really helps our reviewers to make sure that the request going up to ERE or the request being considered by NRAL makes sense and is in line with what you're actually going to be doing. It's also good for us to understand if you are getting access to other computing resources, such as some of the other DOE computing facilities or cloud computing for this project. And then we'll ask for some IO and storage requirements also. Okay, so you're finally ready to submit your request. One thing to remember is that you can keep saving your request, but you can only submit it one time. So before you submit it, make sure you check it, double check it, make sure it's ready to go. After you submit it, an initial review will be done to make sure it's complete. Then it gets passed on to the technical readiness review team. Again, respond promptly if anybody asks you questions about your request. For our vehicle users out there, you may be asked some follow-up questions to see how suitable your workload might be for VTO's custom Swift cluster. And then if you do have changes after you've hit submit, go ahead and send us an email and we'll do our best to accommodate it. Decisions on allocations will be communicated to you before, hopefully, October 1. So October 1 is the start of the fiscal year. Any projects that don't get an allocation, you can still get a pilot size allocation. And also make sure that your requests are taking into account all your needs for the year. So if something changes after it's been submitted, let us know as soon as you know that, so that we can think about it. It is more difficult to try to fit projects in mid-year. But if there are mid-year changes, there often are. This can happen when new projects come online after the allocations have already been decided. In that case, we can always grant a pilot application. This can get projects off the ground. Anything larger than a pilot application, we try to accommodate if compute time is available. This usually happens at quarter boundaries. It often requires, if it's an ERE project, ERE approval on that project. But it does happen. We understand that happens. So just let us know as soon as you know, especially also if you have changes to projects during the year. Email us as soon as you know about those. So for example, if your project ends up not getting funded after all, and you realize you don't need that compute time, let us know. And if your project changes and you need more or less AUs, we will do our best to accommodate those changes during the year. And then just closing comments, get an account now if you don't already have one. Get your request in early, ask us questions if you need help. There's email addresses throughout these slides, and these slides will be made available. Provide the best possible information you can on your request, and take the time to do a good estimate on your computing needs, especially how your computing is dividing up between CPUs and GPUs. So making sure we get that best possible data is key. It helps us plan, effective use of the machine, and makes it more likely that we're going to get all of these requests filled. So, and this is my last slide. So this is where you go to start filling out that form and getting a request in. And there's some other links here for if you want to see the call language itself, learn more about EERE and their mission, more information about Kestrel, and also more information about allocation units as well. So that's the end of the presentation. So I'm gonna hand it back over.
Sounds great. So
Okay.
I just dropped the link in for the new account setup page in the chat, so everyone can be able to access it through there. And then now we will move on to some questions. So give me a second. Here we go. All righty. So the first question we have asks, can we request jobs that use less than a full node? For example, just 16 cores instead of the full 104 cores per node. And if so, will the AUs be scaled accordingly?
Aaron, you want me to take that first, and then maybe you can.
Sure.
So on the CPUs, on the GPU side, we already said that you can request partial, some number of GPUs per node. On the CPU side, we're kind of still testing out some of that. We do expect to have one queue that will let you do that. The other way to do it is manage your jobs such that you use like job arrays where each job is using a certain number of cores, but you're running them all on the same node, things like that. So yeah.
And just to add the color commentary, we hear different feedback from basically different application types and groups. Some are very interested in utilizing shared nodes and can only take advantage of a modest number of cores. Others are really not interested in sharing their node because of performance impacts. So our intention, based on this testing that Chris mentioned, is to start with a partition where we can allow you to submit a shared node job, and you would be charged a scaled. The scaling would be dependent on how many cores and how much memory you request. If you're asking for all the memory on a node, you're still using a full node.
Awesome. Next question. This one says, as you know, there's been much pain from the Lustre file system on Eagle. What has been done in the Kestrel procurement process to mitigate those issues moving forward?
You want me to take that one, Chris?
Sure.
So the first issue is that you'll note that the system is much larger. So there's 95 petabytes of storage available. The other thing that we have done is separated that into 3 file systems. They are still a Lustre file system for the parallel performance, but Home is tuned for smaller files. Scratch is tuned for much higher performance, and Project is large capacity. So we have taken a number of approaches there. I will say we're cautiously optimistic as well. This is a fully integrated cluster store implementation, so a little more mature and newer, that's well tied in with the Slingshot architecture.
Great. Next question says, hi, we, industry, have a project funded by DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management as a part of the HPC 4EI, and it is going to start from August 2023. Are we eligible to apply for allocation? And then a follow-up question. Our team also has partners from a national lab and a university. Do we need to request for allocation separately or together?
I could take that one. So HPC for EI projects have traditionally run on our HPC systems. So those usually are requested through the Advanced Manufacturing Office. So yes, definitely that's eligible. If it's a single project, even though the PIs or the work might be spread across institutions, we still ask that you enter in a single project allocation request. I hope that answered the second part of the question. If you still have a question though, feel free to email.
Great. Next question says, how similar will the Kestrel environment be to the Eagle environment in terms of modules, availability of data sets, and shared projects directories?
You want to take that one, Aaron?
That one, so very similar is the short, somewhat flippant answer. The Slurm configuration is nearly identical. There are some additional partitions and additional queues to support GPUs and this shared node capability. So there's a few more queues, but otherwise Slurm is basically identical. Modules, similar answer. The CPU nodes are a Cray EX architecture, so there are some nuances around the Cray programming environment and some of the modules. But by and large, the applications group is working very hard to make a very similar environment. May not be identical in all cases. Let's see, I think I missed part of the
Project storage. That's also planned to be
shared
pretty similar.
project storage. That's also planned to be similar, if not the same.
Just bigger.
Next question. With the DAV nodes on Eagle, they're kind of first come, first served. Will that be the same on Kestrel, or will there be a scheduler and AU usage for those?
So
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
as I said, the intent on those is that they would be more first come, first serve. They are intended for interactive work, and so they don't tend to fit the scheduler as well. If there's a particular request or ask or something that a project needs, please feel free to reach out.
And Aaron and Chris, if you want to type in that email that you had on the site into the chat and make sure it's to everyone, then they can have that for their notes. The next question, when is it anticipated we will get access to Kestrel to begin porting scripts, software, etc.?
Aaron, you want to take that one?
Sure. So Kestrel was delivered here in March, is in the acceptance testing process currently. This year allocations, you would get access to Kestrel here in July. If you want or need earlier access, we can certainly look at pilot requests for the FY23 to get you started.
Yeah, another thing I want to say about that is when you go to the submission site and you go to that first landing page, there's actually two buttons there. One of them, on the one on the right, is to request your FY24 allocation. The one on the left is to request an FY23 allocation, which is this fiscal year. So if you need early, you want to try to get earlier access on Kestrel this summer, you could apply for an FY23 pilot allocation using that button. And we'll do our best to accommodate it, but those allocations have already been made on Kestrel, but we'll see what we can fit.
Next question. If we have a considerate amount of UAs from the FY23 that weren't used, is it possible to carry them over to FY24?
The short answer to that is no. So you do need to make a new request for FY24. That's the can't go back in time thing. So you can't carry over compute time or allocations into another year. But if you make your request and it's a continuing project, that'll be taken into consideration.
Next question, are you able to start an application and come back to it as needed? For example, if I'm unsure how much capacity we will need and may need to consult other resources to get an accurate estimate.
You definitely should be able to save your request as many times as you need to, but then you can only submit it once. So you can keep saving it and then submit it when have it all complete.
And then this is the last question we have at the moment. So if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to send them in. We still have some extra time to get to some. But this question says, will the default per project storage, will the default per project storage limit still be 10, I'm going to say terabytes or larger?
So the storage limit will be larger. We want to take a close look at how many projects we're supporting, what the storage requests really look like, and make that decision to kind of right size that. So quite confident, given the larger amount of storage available, we will increase those quota limits. We're working on exactly what that will be.
Another question, how will moving data from Eagle to Kestrel work?
So our preferred mode, and something that we're currently testing, would be through data mover nodes. And we will be providing instructions on how to do that. But beyond that, if you have a very large holding, we may want to work with you individually and arrange some sort of additional work to make that relatively seamless, and we can put it in the background and make sure it completes.
Awesome. Well, that was the last question we have right now. We have the email in the chat for any further questions that you may think of after the webinar or anything you want to follow up on. And then the website is also there in the chat. Is there anything, Chris and Aaron, that any last comments, any words of advice before we send off, or does anybody have a last minute question they want to squeeze in? All right.
Yeah.
Well, looks like we're good to go. Everybody gets some time back today, but please feel free to email that email as needed, and we will be circulating this recording later next week once it's posted on our YouTube channel. So thank you all for attending, and please don't hesitate to reach out with more questions. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.